Mending fences with Turkey, the US Vice President is in Ankara attempting to thaw frosty relations following the failed coup in July and to woo back President Erdogan. Will Joe Biden succeed, and does Turkey still trust Washington? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. Now, it's the first visit by a US leader since the failed coup last month. Turkey's Prime Minister Binali Yildirim has welcomed the Vice President Joe Biden in Ankara. Relations between these NATO allies are strained, largely because of Turkey's demand that the US immediately extradite the man it blames for orchestrating the attempted coup. The US insists it needs firm evidence before it can arrest Fethullah Gulen, let alone extradite him. The founder of the Gulen movement and former ally of Erdogan lives in self-imposed exile in the US. Some Turks even think the US was involved in the failed coup.
America is our ally, but it doesn't act like it. It's unjust that they refuse to extradite Gulen.
Even though it won't cost the US anything, I don't think they'll hand him over because the US is using Gulen for political gains.
Well, the Turkish president has made it clear that the strategic partnership with the US will not be helped if Gulen stays in America. Let's hear what the US Vice President and the Turkish Prime Minister had to say.
We are available and ready to provide any assistance that the Turkish government or Turkish people need, if any, as they continue to move forward, as they assert and strengthen their democracy. The United States immediately condemned the tragic events on July the 15th. President Obama was one of the first world leaders to speak out in support of the Turkish government, even while the coup was still unfolding.
The process of extraditing one of the terrorist organizations behind the attempted coup. If it can be extradited and accelerated, then we can have more cooperation in the process. Then I think the grievances of the Turkish people will be remedied to a certain degree, and the overall sentiments, perhaps the issue will go back to being more positive.
The Turkish president says the war in Syria is the main reason Turkey has suffered multiple bomb attacks. Explosions in Turkish cities over the past year have been blamed on ISIL and on Kurdish separatist groups. Since the coup attempt last month, Turkey seems to be shifting its focus away from the West and reaching out to two other major players, Iran and Russia. Relations with Moscow were improved in June with a Turkish apology for the shooting down of a Russian warplane last year. A surprise visit by Iran's foreign minister to Ankara 2 weeks ago opened a new chapter between the neighbours. Well, tensions remain between Turkey and the EU despite the apparent deal over the migrant crisis. Turkey is a key member of NATO with the second largest military in the alliance. Turkish cooperation in the war against ISIL is deemed essential by its allies. All right, let's bring in our guests now. In Istanbul, we have Galip Dalay, Research Director at the Sharq Forum. In London, we have Seckin, Turkey Specialist at IHS Country Risk. And in Washington, D.C., Stein, Senior Resident Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Can I start with you, Galip, in Istanbul? We've already described relations between the United States and Turkey as being pretty acrimonious. How would you characterize the state of relations right now?
Well, let me first state one point. The nature of the relation between the U.S. has never been easy. I recall many times where we described the nature of the relation as being very acrimonious, as being very tense, and as being very low. So this is, one hallmark of the relation between the U.S. and Turkey all the way around. I mean, remember during the time of the Iraqi war, remember around 2008-9. But there is a difference this time, because this nature of the deterioration was not just at the political level, but at the societal level. Turkish society has never been pro-American, but it has never been that anti-American as well too, because the Turkish society widely shared the feeling that the US was at least knew about the coup attempt taking place in Turkey. One of the primary reasons for this is the presence of the Incirlik base, the significance of the Incirlik base during this crisis, during this coup attempt. But nevertheless, this deterioration of the relation does not indicate that Turkey is shifting away from the US and forming strategic or the institutional partnership with Russia and Iran.
All right, let's look a little bit later on. Let's look a little bit beyond the present. But for now, Ege in London, let's look at this present moment. What does Joe Biden need to do in order to shore up relations with what is essentially a critical ally for the United States?
It is limited what Joe Biden can do on his own in a short trip to Ankara. It is actually very belated what he's doing now. This PR campaign in Turkey that was needed, a very dire situation in terms of the disillusionment of both the Turkish people and the government with the US's attitude in the aftermath, during and in the aftermath of the coup attempt on the 15th of July. I recall the initial statement of Secretary Kerry, who wished for stability and continuity in Turkey, which a lot of people in Turkey interpreted as we are waiting and seeing what will happen, and we will take sides accordingly. And that is obviously not what they wanted to hear.
Okay,
so it is very limited what he can do.
Let's take that point then and put it to Aaron in Washington. It sounds very much as though Joe Biden's arrival in Ankara is too little, too late.
Well, I disagree on that. I mean, just to go back to the original statement, the Secretary was, attributed to Secretary Kerry. He was caught after coming out of a meeting with Secretary Lavrov, and Secretary Lavrov's first words were, Russian citizens should stay inside and we'll update you as information keeps coming in. But there's very little talk about that first statement from Lavrov as well. I think that there's an instrumentalization going on of anti-Americanism inside of Turkey to explain away a rather monumentous and tragic coup attempt that took place on July 15th, largely for domestic political reasons inside of Turkey, and that yes, Joe Biden has very little that he can do right now, but because really the decision is up to Turkey. When will its politicians begin to move away from its pivot on, sort of leaning on anti-Americanism and wrapping itself in the flag, and then, begin to, I would just say move back or move away from trying to use or at least put pressure on the United States to alter a judicial process that's largely outside of the hands of the executive branch, even though the widespread perception that the president can actually do something about Fethullah Gulen's extradition.
OK, Galip in Istanbul. So it's all down to Turkey, really, according to Aaron. The Turkish political class need to start broadening their scope and start looking beyond the immediate aftermath of the failed coup attempt. And furthermore, the Gulen extradition case, if you like, is not really a matter of politics. It's a matter of law in the United States.
Well, I mean, this is more or less the official line that we are hearing from the U.S. I mean, this is the line that we are hearing from the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State. But this is like one of the main trouble with this stance is that the U.S. did not apply the same thing to itself when it faced a danger, a monumental danger of that magnitude. After the 9/11, the U.S. did not, the U.S. stood in front of the camera. The President Bush stood in front of the camera, very decidedly said, you are either with us or you're against us. It did not expect much evidence. It did not provide much evidence to its allies when it requested the suspected terrorists from them. It did not pay that much attention to the legal procedures. It created it created some place like Guantanamo, etc., etc. So people, when the Turkish officials look at what U.S. has done when it faced a monumental terrorist attack after 9/11, what it is suggesting to Turkey, they see a stark difference. And here Indeed, it is going to take, it is going to be a legal process as well in the US. It is going to be lengthy, as we can see from also the official statement of the Vice President Biden and also the Turkish Prime Minister Yildirim. But nevertheless, that much emphasis on the judicial aspect, little emphasis on the political aspect, does not fit well into what US has done when it was facing a monumental danger of that matter after 9/11.
Ege in London, so President Erdogan feels hurt, he feels snubbed by the initial reaction by Washington to the failed coup and subsequent events. But how critical, how central would you say is this extradition request for Gulen from the United States? How critical is that to the progress of this relationship?
My argument would be, in fact, that the continued presence of Gulen in the US is actually in the interest of the ruling party in Turkey. His presence in the US will allow them, and is allowing them currently, to justify a lot of what people have argued are extrajudicial measures being taken in the purges taking place in the country. So we have to understand the nuances in between what they're asking publicly and what the actual interests are for the government.
Okay, Aaron in Washington, Ege has just pointed out a couple of the nuances involved in this. There is a public position and perhaps a private position. On the Joe Biden side of this debate, he's also got a private conversation to be had, as well as the public utterances that we've already heard some of, offering all sorts of support and assistance. What will he be saying in private, though?
I don't think they'll actually be very much different. I mean, I think the nuance here is that Fethullah Gulen is a U.S. green card holder, for better or worse, for the status of the bilateral relationship, and so it really is just a judicial process that has to go forward. I completely agree with Ege's comments that there is a incentive for the Turkish government to keep him here in the United States because it allows for this sort of populist upswinging, this instrumentalization of anti-Western, anti-Americanism that was going on, up until this point. But I think as we move forward, it will be clear just for the United States to continue to say both publicly and privately that this is a judicial process, because there's a precedent to be set here. If the United States is seen to be bowing to political pressure, even from a close ally, to simply extradite somebody outside of the rule of law, what will the State Department, what will the Department of Justice, what will the next administration have to say when, say, a country like China comes along and says you need to extradite X leader because he's involved in coup plotting in our country? And so, there is a longer, much broader picture to be played here. It's not just a vacuum where U.S. and Turkey talk to each other. The U.S. has interests all over the world, and this legal process has to be upheld.
All right. Galip, I'm just wondering whether the latest military developments with Turkey becoming an active participant in the war in northern Syria, whether this changes the dynamic, because, of course, Turkish tanks were given US-led coalition air cover.
Well, I think this is taking place with the full knowledge of the U.S. It's not against the U.S. It's being it is happening with the U.S. knowledge and actual word of the support. And also this operation is quite limited in its scope, and it's quite limited the group that is targeting. It is focused on the pocket, the Jarablus Azaz pocket, and actually right now just Jarablus pocket, where the ISIS is the main force. And with this operation, Turkey mainly has 3 targets. One of them is to eradicate the ISIS presence on its border, which we saw that could be quite dangerous for Turkey, as the recent Gaziantep bombing has shown it, in which the 54 citizens of Turkey was killed. The secondly, to stop the Kurdish advance, the Syrian Kurdish PYD's advance towards the north and towards the west, to connect the remaining cantons, the remaining gap between the Afrin and the Kobani cantons, therefore creating a territorial contiguous area along Turkish border. And the third one, to create basically a breathing space for the Syrian opposition. But as I said, Turkey, I don't see right now Turkey going anywhere beyond the Jarablus. It will keep the focus and the operation limited, as far as I'm concerned.
And again, in London, do these military objectives that have been outlined by Galip in Istanbul, do these military objectives concur with US military objectives in the short term at least?
So that's a very good point, because what's happening now with the Turkish incursion and the Turkey-backed rebel groups attacking Jarablus and trying to take it from the Islamic State, we are seeing the crystallization of what has been a long-running friction between the positions of Turkey and the US in northern Syria. The US, of course, with its partnership with the Kurdish militias under the YPG in that area, and Turkey's vehement opposition to that group, citing its relationship with the Kurdish militias fighting an insurgency against the Turkish government in Turkey. So this is really bringing that to the fore, and it will be difficult, especially as this offensive proceeds forward and as these groups push further south to carve out this breathing space, as Mr. Galip mentioned, and as they become, the proximity between them and the Kurdish groups increases, there will be a lot more tension between Turkey and the US, and that will require a lot of coordination between their positions.
All right.
We are yet to see how that will proceed.
All right, Aaron, so how's Joe Biden going to square that circle then with Turkey being quite clear about not allowing the YPG to establish its territorial ambitions, a contiguous, self-administered part of northern Syria, and yet, of course, there is US backing for the YPG along with other groups as they carry out their fight against ISIL?
I mean, it's nothing new, and I would just take slight issue with I think that this is actually in U.S. interest, and I think that there's probably significant forewarning to the U.S., or at least a couple of days of forewarning to the U.S., particularly about Jarablus. The U.S. does not have an interest in the Syrian YPG or SDF taking Jarablus because it would violate Turkey's red line. The previous movements of the YPG across the Euphrates River, both starting at Tishreen and then sort of culminating in the taking of Manbij, were coordinated quite closely with Turkey. The operation got its final go-ahead from Incirlik Air Force Base, which is obviously inside Turkey, and the air assets to support the mission, both for the intelligence, satellite, and reconnaissance, the ISR planes, as well as the strike planes, F-16s, A-10s, are all based inside of Turkey too. So to say that Turkey wasn't at least informed and probably privately acquiesced to this SDF-led strategy to take Manbij, I think misses the point that the strike assets are coming from inside Turkey, and that moving forward, this is the next logical phase of that, which is a different set of rebel groups, more amenable and more friendly to Turkey, moving into Jarablus, perhaps extending a little bit farther west along the border to prevent, as Galip was saying, the movement of the YPG forward to connect the cantons. So I don't think that this is incongruent with American interests, but obviously when you have this many moving parts inside of a foreign country, things get complicated, and it will take a lot of coordination, particularly out of the coalition and the United States with Ankara moving forward about this operation.
All right, Galip. Recently, we've seen the rapprochement between Moscow and Ankara following their serious falling out over the downing of a Russian plane. How seriously would you say is Turkey thinking about reorientating itself, looking to other partnerships in order to bolster what it sees as the disappointment that it's received from the West, not just the US, but from the EU as well?
Well, I mean, the reorientation, if this means Turkey changing the alliance, Turkey withdrawing from NATO, it's not serious at all. I don't think that Turkey will withdraw from NATO. I don't think that Turkey will break away from the US and the West, because the Turkey's ties to the West is structural, is historical, and is institutional. While Turkey and Russia or Turkey and Iran can cooperate on the issue base, can compartmentalize the issue, can cooperate in certain issues, but we're not going to witness a structural and strategic partnership between Turkey and Iran, Turkey and Russia, because their perception of their interests in all the nearby areas are actually conflicting. Turkey and Russia are on the opposing side in Balkans. Turkey and Russia are on the opposing side in Central Asia and in most of the actual Middle East as well, and the same goes with Iran. But that doesn't mean that there isn't any scope of cooperation between them. For instance, Turkey and Iran can perfectly cooperate on the Kurdish geopolitics in the Middle East. Turkey and Russia can perfectly cooperate on economy and energy. But I don't see this a shift of axis. If we see anything, what I would call the Turkish de Gaullism, meaning that Turkey will adopt a much more independent foreign policy and will prioritize its own perception of its interest, and maybe with little attention to what its allies would demand from it. But this doesn't mean that Turkey will be breaking up from the West and searching for alternative arrangements.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? The fact that Turkey's interests range beyond the immediate scenario that we're witnessing in Syria. Turkey has much broader, longer-term interests.
Of course, definitely. In Syria, I mean, right now the operation seems to be targeting the Islamic State, but as our other guests mentioned, there are broader goals in that picture, such as the prevention of the expansion of the Kurds in northern Syria and what have you. But taking an even bigger picture, we have to look at Turkey's desire to expand its influence in the Balkans, in Central Asia, and across the Middle East. We have to look at what is the bigger picture of what is happening in Syria right now. And by that I mean that of proxy war between Turkey and Iran, which is taking place not only in Syria but also in other arenas, such as Iraq, for example. And we have to bear in mind the bigger picture behind what's happening and the fact that all these issues are interrelated.
Okay, Aaron, I'll give the last word to you as we are running out of time, but that applies to the United States as well, doesn't it? The fact that the United States needs Turkey for a host of reasons beyond its role in the fight against ISIL that we're currently witnessing at the moment.
Yeah, the United States is still the world's only global superpower, and so it has a rather unique set of interests that are globally focused. You know, Turkey plays a large part of that because it is one of the 60-so-odd nations that fall under sort of the global rubric of American military alliances and basing agreements. And so obviously the interests are far broader than what I would say is a very narrowly defined air war going on right now against the Islamic State, where most of the troubles emanate from. And so if both countries can look beyond, you know, the sort of sub-state actor problem, the PKK, the Islamic State, Fethullah Gulen, you know, and they look more broadly, the interests converge at the 30,000-foot level. But I still think that there will be frictions at the 5-foot level in how you try to implement those convergences in agreement.
OK, I said that was the last word, but I'm going to be extra generous and, Galip, give the last word to you, because what does Turkey want from the United States in order to help it recover from the trauma of the coup attempt that was, what, just 6 weeks ago?
Well, what does Turkey want from the U.S.? It's not very easy. I mean, at the official line, when you look at the official talk, Turkey wants two things. One of them is the extradition of the Gulen, and another one is more sympathy to its position on Syria. And both of them are not. Both of them are unlikely to be delivered to Turkey, and that's why I think, like, you know, Turkey and U.S. will try to, like, you know, find another areas, another opportunities to basically, you know, work through their ways.
So thanks to all our guests. In Istanbul, Galip Dalay, Research Director at the Sharq Forum. In London, we have Seckin, Turkey Specialist at IHS, Country Risk. And in Washington, D.C., Aaron Stein, Senior Resident Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. For more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. But for now, from me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.